telecom sector was dealt a body blow by the Supreme Court today, one that may not see key players even recovering. A legal battle that began 14 years ago has culminated with the top court ruling in favor of the government in a case which will see large telecom players pay out over 92,000 crore rupees in dues. Over half of these will have to be paid by Vodafone-Idea and Bharti Airtel. So before we begin the debate, just a quick explainer of what exactly has happened. Now, since 2005, telecom companies and the Government of India have been fighting over how to define AGR or adjusted gross revenue of these companies. Why this matters is because the government charges these companies 3 to 5% of their adjusted gross revenue as spectrum usage charge and 8% as license fees. The fight all this time has been about what defines this AGR, because the larger the AGR, the more fees companies pay. Companies have been arguing that only revenues from telecom services should be included in the AGR. The Department of Telecom says all revenue, even from non-core business like sale of assets, etc., should be included in the AGR. The Supreme Court has ruled in the government's favor and also included penalties. But right now, with a debt of over 7 lakh crore rupees, the telecom industry just can't afford it. To talk about the impact this move will have on key players, I'm joined now by Sanjay Kapoor, former CEO of Bharti Airtel, S.S. Sirohi, former member of the Telecom Commission, and Rajiv Sharma, Head Institutional Equity Research, SBI Cap Securities. Welcome to all of you and thank you for speaking with us again. Sanjay, great to have you back on the show on a very important day for the telecom industry. How do you see this all panning out?
Well, anybody who's associated with telecom can't be too happy about what happened here, because all of us have been seeing the impact of Jio's entry on the market and on the incumbent players. We all, in a way, were happy that the structure of the industry has moved from almost a perfect competition to oligopoly, and probably a market which has 3 players and will eventually consolidate and make money. While we said that operators with even 300 million customers were struggling to make money and the losses were mounting. In the midst of all that, technology changes were happening faster than ever. Technologies used to last 10 years earlier, now they don't last more than 4-5 years. While we are still rolling out 4G, we were talking about 5G. And also a very important factor that when the industry was 2G and 3G, operators out of the total ecosystem used to make between 60 and 65% of the total revenues that accrued. Whereas as we moved to 4G, there were other digital service players and fringe players who came into the market and content players, and therefore the share of the telecom service providers shrunk to 40%. In the midst of all that, there were leveraged balance sheets, like you said, 700,000 crores of debt, which piled up. A lot of deferred payments to be made to the Government of India for spectrum, and spectrum is undoubtedly the most expensive in the world. And 5G staring at you while you're still rolling out 4G. No matter what the size of your balance sheet is, the expense that's required to transform into new technologies is same for everybody. And therefore, if you go by what's happening across the globe, it's becoming a 3-player market virtually everywhere in the world, where the top player makes money, the second player is neither here nor there, on the break even at best, and the third one definitely loses money. And I think similar thing was happening in India. And in the midst of all this, you have a 14-year-old case that gets decided.
Right.
And now the incumbents who are already reeling under pressure have now to cough up this. How will that happen? How will they sustain themselves? And what happens going into future becomes a big question mark for the whole industry.
Well, I'm just going to come out and ask the question straight up. Rajiv Sharma, is Vodafone-Idea going to survive this? Who's going to survive this and who's not? Clearly, they don't have the money. And, you know, we'll pull up the financials for you. 7 lakh crore rupees is what telecom companies owe. This is bad news for banks as well, who have their debt on their books. The weakest of the lot right now seems Vodafone-Idea.
You know, let me put the things in a different context. Before survival, there is a big spectrum liability of about 12 billion US dollars, which is with Vodafone to DOT for all the spectrum purchase in the auctions for 900 for renewal or 4G spectrum for data. So it's not about only a Vodafone survival. It's also about how government addresses its own liabilities, 12 billion, 6 billion from Bharti, from the telecom sector, and particularly from the incumbents. And coincidentally, they are the one who've been adversely impacted by the judgment today. So there have been certain news flow around government looking at some kind of moratorium on spectrum payments for 2 years, and even today there's something in the morning which was talking about a floor price for voice coming in around 15 paise. Even if it is 10 paise, that means the sector gets additional 6 billion US dollar revenues. Now, Vodafone-Idea would get, Vodafone-Idea and Bharti would get 2 billion each, and this could 90% go into EBITDA. So something on those lines can revive the sector, can set this off, what has happened today, as well as give visibility to government's own dues from the sector. So the ball is in the government's court as to whether we are 3-player, 2-player, I think
and
very
which
much.
players survive. Absolutely. Mr. Sirohi, this is the perfect time for you to come in. Do you see the government intervening, providing some relief? Should they at this point? Because the government has also pursued the argument that these companies have underreported their revenues when they got the opportunity. There's a CAG report which says the same thing.
I would like to state that the Supreme Court judgment is extremely fair, and also ensures that all the operators must follow the rule of law. And here in this case they have held the viewpoint of Department of Telecom, rightly so. And I am surprised that as far as the AGR is concerned, in the license agreement which the telecom service providers have signed with the government, who is the licensor, it very clearly states, there is no ambiguity whatsoever in that what constitutes an AGR. And what is exempted from there is only the outgoing roaming charges or interconnect charges which are outgoing from the operator. Except that, there is nothing. So where is the question of ambiguity on that? Why earlier the telecom service provider were avoiding to the correct payment of their dues, and they are trying to underreport their gross revenues and AGRs consequently. So there was, I would say, because I have been in the government earlier also, I would say that this was almost well calibrated, deliberate strategy to postpone payment of dues to the government and save on the interest and all those things. And now, and what they get advantage out of that, they have saved on that for the last 15-20 years. They have been saving money out of that. And their profits were earlier used to be windfall profits. If you remember, in 2004 to 2006-8, it used to be like that, whereby the charges for calls were very high, and the spectrum charges were very low. Almost administered spectrum prices were 1,600 crores for almost 5 megahertz at the time. And from there, that spectrum is still being used. And now, as a result, what happened? Despite making windfall, they did not plow back their profits into the modernization of the network or the proper expansion of the network at the right time. So they are suffering from the skewed their business strategies and ill-timed decisions, or whatever you call it. So they are fully responsible for this thing, for their whatever mess they are. And all over the world, in telecom sector, whenever sector grows, there is stability of revenues and stability of customer base. That's what has happened. When the new operator comes, there is some churn, some ruffleness happens. It disturbs the whole equilibrium, and it is a transient phenomenon. And after that, it stabilizes in 4 to 5 years. This is all transient phenomenon. Now, what when you make a profit during your heydays, you should plow back the profit when you are having a business cycle which is low.
Sir,
why they are not doing? Why promoters are not bringing in the money? We have in the both of the Airtel and Vodafone, we have foreign promoters. Why they don't put in money here at, at this point
Sanjay
of time?
Kapoor is
Why
smiling.
don't they modernize their infrastructure?
Sanjay Kapoor is smiling. I'm going to get him to respond to some of the points that Mr. Sirohi has placed before us. Companies have saved a lot of money by postponing these dues. Now the time to collect has come.
You know, I do not want to say anything about the order that the Supreme Court has passed. I'm sure in their wisdom they've given a fair order. The fair order might not be palatable to somebody who has to cough up so much money, but because the Supreme Court has taken a call, we respect that decision of the court. While I say that, I think it's very imperative for us as a country where the physical infrastructure is still weak and we are investing and we need much more investment, but our virtual infrastructure, and especially supported by telecom and IT, has done fairly well compared to our physical infrastructure and is competitive globally. Now we are talking about a situation where we are jeopardizing the sustenance of that virtual infrastructure. If we were to be left with only one company, hypothetically, and I don't know, this may not have pinched the new operator in the current round, but these high taxations will hit all operators in future. Ultimately, a $1.50 ARPU market cannot sustain with such high taxation, with such high cost of spectrum, and the fact that the longevity of the technology is shortening with every phase, every new development on technology. Given all that, how do you sustain an industry? And today, it is not that the banks are worried alone about what's happening. We have to keep in mind that there's a larger ecosystem which comprises of even small and medium enterprises who are all invested in one way or the other into the success of telecommunications. And if this industry was to go down, then the impact will be much larger than what we can count with those 7 lakh crores of debt alone. And I think we need to keep that in mind, and therefore sustaining this industry is paramount. And and I've heard, it's not that the government is saying anything different. I've heard the Prime Minister and everybody else from the ministry also say they are worried about the sustenance of this industry. Now let me comment on that. My dear friend Rajiv, made a comment that we could have a minimum price for voice. India is a very price sensitive country, and you remember the days when STD after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening was cheaper, and we had 95% of the calls only after that time in the evening. You tried to put a base price to a voice call, and you will see a migration to internet calling completely with the smartphone customers. You will also see a disruption on the simplicity of the pricing, and finally the guys who will end up paying that price will be the feature phone users, who are the least common denominators. They'll become the most expensive service gainers in the marketplace. So I don't think that's really a solution. The long-term solution for a market where the spectrum is market discovered in terms of pricing, I think there's clearly a room for us to lessen the burden of taxation on the industry. Of course, some bit of deferred payments on the dues by the operators will help them on cash flows, but P&Ls and the accounting will still make their net debt to EBITDAs look very, very poor, and the banks will not come forward lending money to them. And if we are not going to be lending money to this industry and enough equity is not available, how do we plan to migrate from 4G to 5G and 5G to 6G in future?
That's the next question. What happens to the 5G auctions in FY20? If you have 2 players left, then what kind of an auction do we see? And let's ask the big question everyone's talking about. What does all of this mean for Jio? Mr. Sirohi, you want to come in on some of those points?
Yeah, so I think...
Let me go to Mr. Sirohi. Yes.
No, I would like to first clarify, respond to Mr. Sanjay. I would like to respond to Mr. Sanjay. I would like to state that whenever the company, as far as telecom sector is concerned as a whole, it is very vibrant and dynamic in India. And if you see from there, the voice calls, the tariff of the voice has gone down in the last 5 years from 2014 down below, almost by 5 times, and the usage has increased by almost 88% usage has increased. The customers have got a lot of customers have got into broadband, onboarding has taken place. So, in terms of data usage, we were around 70 or 60, 70 megabit this thing usage was there per subscriber. Now it has gone to 11, almost more than 11 gigahertz per subscriber per month. So, it is a huge 1500% rise in data usage. It means it has gone down to the masses because of affordability. I mean, cheaper tariffs and expansion of huge expansion in the last 4 years in the digital infrastructure. That is what we want. So, country is getting benefited. Country, lot of contribution is taking place for GDP because of the increase in the digital infrastructure.
That's fine. That's fine. The question is how many players will survive? The question
all over the country.
Yeah. The question
now I would like to tell.
Yeah.
Now, let me complete, please. Yeah. Now, I would like to tell that now, as far as the individual companies are concerned, if they have not made the gone for inducting new technology, they should do right now. They should invest in the infrastructure, and as far as earlier what they have been doing, they have been going for auction. Even if they are when they bid for auction, they bid for more than reserve price. Why they were bidding for more than reserve price earlier in 2015 and 16? And then they bought the this thing. Why they were going in for if there was a problem with the funding? Because they were easily getting the funds from banks, Indian banks. So, they over leveraged themselves. So, whenever crisis will take place, whenever competition will take place in that phase, they will definitely have to bear the heat.
Mr.
Now,
Saroi,
what they should do, they should bring the investment from outside. They should disinvest. They should disinvest their equity and bring the funds from outside. All their partners are foreign partners. Why not get FDI?
But they should be willing to put in more money in a market which looks
Why,
increasingly
first you
unstable
bring that,
for the
then you ask
telecom sector.
ask from the bank.
One minute. The market looks increasingly unstable for the telecom sector.
No.
Will they want to disinvest and bring in more equity or not is another very big question. But let me just come very quickly to you, Rajiv, on the 5G question. Can auctions take place in 2020, and what about Jio? How does all of this play out for Jio, which has been the huge disruptor in the whole space?
So, I'll take this question and also a couple of things which I wanted to talk about. But again, I'll state a question against your question. Can the government go ahead with auction if there is only one telco participating in the auction?
Exactly.
Because even if you ask Jio today, what is their view on 5G, they believe that it's still not the right time for 5G. So, they're also talking about a 12-18 months from today. But even then, and if these penalties were to stay as is, then you would just have Jio, because Bharti's done a lot of things like the rights issue, like the Africa IPO, and it had some room to get into selectively 5G, maybe in the urban centers. But with this penalties, that room seems to be limited now. So,
right.
So now the government needs to think that if there is only one player participating in the auction, then is it really auction the right way? And coming to what Sanjay mentioned about the floor pricing.
Yeah, who will pay for voice basically?
Yeah, I believe that there are 250-300 million 2G, 3G users today which are still using voice.
Yeah, so but he's right. They are the lowest common denominator.
Correct.
It's not going to play out well.
So in the interim, this could help the sector and the incumbents to get some revenues. But obviously, as he rightly points out, that in the medium to long term, everybody moves to data and voice over internet.
It's going to be a tough ask to even play out in terms of policy. For a government to come and say, okay, now why don't you vasulo your money from the poorest who have the feature phone?
But then, there will be other sectors like airline or
Yeah.
others which come
you know,
in as
that's,
well.
I'm actually going to end talking about another sector, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on this very, very important subject, which we thought we should touch upon even on result day with all its political twists and turns. But this is a huge story on what's happening to the telecom sector. Just to wrap up, take a look at what's happened with Maruti Suzuki today and talks about another sector in deep distress, that is the auto sector. 39% drop in profits year on year. This is something we should really sit up and think about. If the telecom sector is in trouble, if the auto sector is in trouble, what does it say over the state of the overall economy? It's a big question that the government needs to think about today. With that, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening on the India Development Debate.